Hi, my name is Autif Kamal, and this is another episode of Be Logical. You may remember that in the 15th episode of Be Logical, at the end of the podcast, I said that I went to a Christmas party and I had a discussion with my brother's friend regarding, I guess, the factors that contributed to the lack of deaths by firearm in Japan. And he said it's not just gun control that leads to the lack of deaths in Japan, but also how their culture is different from America's gun culture. And I want to use this podcast, this episode, as a follow-up to that. I want to compare America's gun culture to Japan's gun culture. And I can't promise that this episode will be exhaustive in that comparison, but I think you'll definitely get a better idea of how they value guns very differently. Okay, so first I want to give you a quote from Tsutomu Uchida. I'm getting this quote from Eric Talmadge. He wrote an article titled "Around World Gun Rules and Results Vary Wildly." That's with the Associated Press. Now, just to give you some background, Tsutomu Uchida, he is the owner of Kanagawa Oni shooting range, which Eric describes as being an Olympic-style training area. Now, Tsutomu Uchida is not going to speak for all of Japan, but I think his perspective is still a valuable one, just because I imagine that he interacts with many clients and they talk about how they feel with guns to each other. So I speculate that Tsutomu's views could reflect to an extent how some people in Japan feel about guns. Okay, and this is his quote. He says, "We have a very different way of looking at guns in Japan than people in the United States. In the US, people believe that they have a right to own a gun. In Japan, we don't have that right, so our point of departure is completely different." Now, I want to buttress that point. Okay, so you may have seen or heard the America's Second Amendment before, which says, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Okay, so that is interpreted very often as saying that Americans have a right to have a firearm. Okay, now Japanese weapon law starts from the opposite point. It begins like this: "No one shall possess a firearm or firearms, or a sword or swords." And I'm getting that from David B. Kopel with the Asia Pacific Law Review in his article titled "Japanese Gun Control." Okay. Now, to give you another idea, here are some results from a Gallup poll. This was from an article titled "Gun Ownership and Use in America." It's by Joseph Carroll. Now, you have 67% that say that they use guns for protection against crime, 66% that say they use it for target shooting, and 58% for hunting. Okay, so I think it's just interesting to see how many people feel that they need it for protection against crime. And also, I just want to be clear, again, these results were published in October of 2005, and I imagine, it's my speculation, that the percentage that say for protection against crime may have risen because of the Tucson, Arizona shooting, Aurora, Colorado, and the Newtown, Connecticut shootings. I can't say for sure, but that is my speculation. Okay, now also, there was a spike in firearms that were purchased a week after the Newtown, Connecticut shooting. I'm getting this from Natey Hindman, who's with the Huffington Post. He wrote an article titled "Walmart Out of Guns as Americans Race for Arms After Newtown." And he states that Walmart sold out of semi-automatic firearms in 5 states. And just to be fair, at least for me, it's not clear whether he meant that there is at least one Walmart in each of those 5 states that sold out of semi-automatic firearms, or every single Walmart in all 5 of those states sold out of semi-automatic firearms. That's something that's not clear to me, so I just want you to be aware of that. Also, Nate C. Heineman, he gives an anecdote of a police officer in one of those states who, a week prior to the Newtown, Connecticut shooting, was shopping for an AR-15. At the time that he was shopping for that modified version of an AR-15, the price was for the range that he gave was from $600 to $1,000. Now, a week after the shooting, that same AR-15, it shot up to a range from $1,000 to $1,600. Okay, so just to give you an anecdote of how much the price for firearms increased after the Newtown, Connecticut shooting. And my speculation is that because people become fearful, many people become fearful after they hear about a shooting. The thought a fearful person might have is, there was a shooting, that could happen to me. And I think I can see where that fear comes from, but I still think that it's unreasonable, because there are so many things that could happen to you, that are possible to happen to you, but whether they actually will is a totally different question. You could get in an elevator and it could drop from the 10th to the last floor. You could walk down the stairs and trip and fall. You could drive a car and get in a crash the next time you drive. Those are all things that are possible, but whether they'll actually happen is a totally different question. But yeah, basically I think when people hear about these shootings, the demand for guns increases, the demand for ammunition increases, because they're worried about getting stuck in a situation like a shooting. Okay. Now also, I think what helps to show you the value of guns in the United States versus Japan is how many firearms per 100 people there are. Now, in the United States, there are 89 firearms per 100 people. In Japan, there are 0.6. Okay. Now, just to be fair, these numbers, they're not necessarily just because of how much they value firearms, but they could also be because of the types of laws used to restrict or not restrict firearms in each Japan and the United States. And I'm getting these numbers from gunpolicy.org. Okay, now what I want to show you is I want to show you this segment from CNN. It's called Open Mic. It appears that they got random people from Japan to just express their views on gun control. For my case, I'm going to assume that they picked random people in Japan, but it's up to you whether you decide to choose that they had some sort of agenda in how they picked a person in Japan to express their views on gun control. And I think this will just give an idea of what some of the people in Japan think about gun usage and control. So I'll show you that video right now.
は法律的に規制されていることが他の国ではそうでないっていうことに少し驚きました。
普通の家に銃があるっていうのはおかしいと思います。いつでも誰でもちょっとして腹が立った時に銃を使って犯罪を起こすことができるっていうのはやはりおかしいことだと思います。
こんな事件が続くなら教師が武装しなきゃいけなくなっちゃう、子供を守るためにですね。 そういう学校になってしまうんじゃないかと。
そういった議論が起こらないといけないっていうのがまずおかしいなと思いましたし、規制されて当たり前だと思っています。
これからアメリカも銃が規制されるような世の中になってくれればと思います。日本みたいに、日本はとても夜も安全に歩けますので、やはりそういうようなことも、銃が規制されているということも関係あるんだと思います。
日本であんまり怖い殺人事件とかがあっても銃が乱射されてっていうような事件はあまり聞かないですね。
やっぱり簡単に人を殺傷できるようなものが手近にあるというのはですね、これはやっぱしどうかなと私は思います。だから怒りというよりもなんかこう寂しい感じがしますね。
Okay, so the general idea from that video was that basically having guns does not make us safe. Gun control is good, and the general idea you can get from the comparison between the Japanese and American gun culture is that for the Japanese, gun ownership is not viewed as a right. And also something I forgot to mention, which you may have already heard, is that in Japan, you're only permitted to get air guns and shotguns, which are permitted only for hunting or target practice. And the process to get that license is by itself still pretty rigorous. You have to take a class, you have to do a written exam, you have to do a mental evaluation, a drug test, you have to do a field test in a shooting range, and if you pass all those requirements, then you can get a license in Japan. Now in the US, gun ownership is viewed as a right, and also contrary to what the Japanese think, or at least as depicted in that CNN video, and based on the quote of Tsutomu Uchida, many Americans seem to believe that they are safer with a firearm. Okay, so that's how they embrace contrary propositions. Okay, and that's basically it for this episode of Be Logical. Alright, thank you.